At my niece's birthday, my sister sneered, "Still playing house with your cats?" Everyone laughed until the door opened. A man walked in carrying my toddler. "Go to Mama," he said. She ran into my arms shouting, "Mommy." The room froze. Of all the family gatherings, the children's birthday parties were always the most potent crucibles for my sister Karen's particular brand of commentary. My niece Emma's 5th birthday was no exception. The theme was Enchanted Princess, which, in Karen's world, translated to an explosion of pink tulle, plastic tiaras, and a bounce house that dominated the backyard of her suburban home. The noise was a constant, percussive backdrop, a symphony of childish glee and adult chatter trying to rise above it. I stood near the punch bowl, a silent island in the storm of family chaos. At 28, I was accustomed to my role, the quiet, childless younger sister, the perpetual aunt who could always be counted on for a thoughtful gift but who remained a fascinating, slightly pitiable enigma to the rest of the clan. Karen, at 32, was my polar opposite. She had mapped her life out with the precision of a military campaign. Married at 22, 3 children by 26, a minivan, a mortgage, and a life that screamed traditional success. She had appointed herself the family arbiter of what constituted a real adult life, and my choices consistently failed her inspection. The dates had started years ago, subtle at first, then blooming into the full-blown family sport they were today. Must be nice to have all that free time. She'd sigh during family dinners, her eyes sweeping over my child-free, responsibility-light existence. I guess some people just aren't ready for real responsibility. The extended family would offer uneasy chuckles, and I, wanting to preserve the peace for the sake of my nieces and nephews, would simply smile and steer the conversation towards safer waters. But her favorite, most worn barb was the one about my cats. "Still playing house with Mr. Whiskers and Luna?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with a condescension, so thick you could spread it on toast. It was her go-to dismissal for any hint of domesticity in my life. A new recipe I'd mastered, the kitchen I'd painstakingly renovated, the Thanksgiving dinner I'd hosted for friends. In her eyes, my efforts were merely a child, elaborate game of pretend, a sad pantomime of the life she lived for real. The cruelty had intensified over the past year. When I'd shown the family photos of my newly renovated kitchen, Karen had quipped, "Wow, such an elaborate setup just to heat up fancy feast." When she'd walked into my dining room, set for 12 with a beautiful tables cape for my first hosted Thanksgiving, she'd murmured, "This is gorgeous, Emma. It's a shame it's just for practice. Maybe someday you'll get to do this for a real family." The worst part was the slow, insidious way the rest of the family had begun to echo her sentiments. What was once Karen's individual meanness had become accepted family humor, a running gag at my expense. What none of them knew, what I had guarded as my most precious secret, was that for the past 2 years, I hadn't been playing house. I had been quietly, carefully, building one. It began at a work conference, a world away from family gatherings and passive-aggressive commentary. There I met James. He was intelligent, kind, and carried a quiet strength that I found immediately captivating. Over coffee after a long day of presentations, he opened up about his life. His voice softened, his eyes alight with a mixture of love and pain, as he told me about his 3-year-old daughter, Sophie. He showed me a picture on his phone, a little girl with a wild mane of curly brown hair and enormous, expressive eyes, grinning a toothless, spaghetti-smeared grin. Her mother left when she was barely a year old, he explained, his tone matter-of-fact, but his eyes betraying the hurt. Just packed up and disappeared, signed away her rights. Sophie, she's everything to me. She's the reason I get up every morning. I should have been intimidated. Dating a single father came with a level of complexity and responsibility I had never known. But the depth of James's love for his daughter, the absolute clarity with which he prioritized her well-being, didn't scare me away. It drew me in. Here was a man who understood real commitment, who had proven his capacity for selfless love. Our courtship was slow, deliberate, and conducted with the stealth of a covert operation. 4 months, we met for coffee during Sophie's preschool hours or had dinner dates after she was asleep. James was fiercely protective, determined not to let another woman into Sophie's life only to disappear. He had learned that lesson the hard way. When he finally decided I was ready to meet her, he planned the introduction with the strategic care of a general. We met at a children's museum on a Saturday morning. Sophie was shy at first, a silent observer hiding behind her father's legs. But her curiosity soon won out. For 3 hours, we explored the exhibits, and I let her lead the way. I listened, genuinely listened, as she explained the mechanics of a miniature watermill and the sleeping habits of the stuffed animals in the pretend veterinary clinic. By the time we left for lunch, her small, confident hand was tucked securely in mine. "I like her, Daddy," she announced loudly in the restaurant, speaking about me as if I weren't there. "She listens good, and she didn't try to fix my hair." James had laughed, a warm, rich sound. "High praise from the peanut gallery," he told me, his eyes sparkling. That was the beginning. Sophie and I developed a bond that felt both surprising and inevitable. I, who had never spent much time with small children, was utterly charmed by her unfiltered honesty and fierce curiosity. The transition was gradual, then sudden. One night, during a sleepover, she had a nightmare. James was in the shower, so I went to her. I sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her back as she cried about the monster in her dream. When she finally calmed, she snuggled into my side and whispered, "Thanks, Mama Emma." My heart stopped. James found us there 20 minutes later, Sophie fast asleep against my shoulder, me fighting back tears. "Did she just?" he whispered. I could only nod. He sat beside us, his hand gently smoothing Sophie's hair. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "And completely in love with both of you." That was the moment our future solidified. We began talking about marriage, about me legally adopting Sophie. James was clear-eyed about the commitment. "Being a parent is forever, Emma," he'd said. "There's no casual about it." My answer was immediate and certain. I was all in. 8 months ago, I moved into their house, with its big backyard and a guest room that Sophie immediately designated as the playroom where Mama's cats can live. My 2 feline companions, Mr. Whiskers and Luna, acclimated with regal indifference. The Mama Emma phase was sweet, but it was shortened one evening at dinner when Sophie, without ceremony, asked, "Mama, can you pass the ketchup?" The room went still. James and I exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated joy. Later, tucking her into bed, I asked, "Are you okay with that? Calling me Mama?" She looked at me as if I'd asked why the sky was blue. "You are my Mama," she stated with 6-year-old finality. "You make my lunch and read me stories and help me brush my teeth. And you love me. That's what mamas do." Out of the mouths of babes. We decided to keep our new family a secret from my family for a little while longer. Only my best friend and my younger brother, Alex, knew. I wanted to savor this private, precious time without the cacophony of outside opinions. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I relished the thought of the moment when Karen's smug, condescending world would be irrevocably rocked. Which brought me back to Emma's princess party. James and I had hatched a plan. I would go alone, as usual. He would stay home with Sophie, who was fighting a minor cold. If she woke from her nap feeling better, they would join me. "Let them make their assumptions," James had said with a mischievous grin. "Then we'll show up and blow their minds." I arrived bearing my carefully chosen gift, a beautiful, intricate Victorian dollhouse, complete with working lights and tiny, detailed furniture. When Emma unwrapped it, her gasp of genuine delight was a balm to my soul. "Oh my gosh, Aunt Emma, this is so cool!" she exclaimed, immediately engrossed in exploring its tiny rooms. That's when Karen struck. "Wow, Emma," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Looks like Aunt Emma is still playing house. Now she's just getting you to do it, too." She laughed, and a few relatives chuckled uneasily. I mean, at least someone's getting some use out of Emma's domestic fantasies, right? I felt the familiar heat in my cheeks but held my smile. I'm glad she likes it. But Karen, perhaps emboldened by wine or an audience, was just warming up. She turned to address the room, a queen holding court. "You know what I love about Emma," she began, gesturing toward me with her glass. "She's 28 and still playing house with her cats like she's living in some fantasy world. Most people grow out of that phase, but Emma is really committed to the bit." The room grew quiet. This was mean, even for Karen. "I mean, don't get me wrong," she continued, basking in the uncomfortable silence. "The cat lady lifestyle works for some people. Very low maintenance. No real responsibility. Must be nice to have all that freedom to what do you do again. Arrange your throw pillows and cook fancy meals for one." A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. My parents looked down, suddenly fascinated by the floor. Karen raised her glass in a mock toast. "Maybe someday Emma will join the rest of us in the real world, but until then, we'll just keep watching her play house with Mr. Whiskers and Luna." Humiliation and anger warred within me, but beneath it was a profound, steadying calm. I knew a truth she didn't. I checked my phone. 3:47 p.m. I sent a quick text to James. "If Sophie's up and feeling okay, you should come by. I think it's time." His reply was instantaneous. "On our way." Red heart. I looked up at my sister, who was still glowing with the satisfaction of her performance. I stood, smoothing my dress. "You know what, Karen? You're absolutely right. I have been playing house." I allowed a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. But here's the thing about playing house. Sometimes you get so good at it that it stops being pretend. Confusion flickered across her face. Before she could form a retort, the sound of a car door closing echoed from the driveway. Then, footsteps on the front porch. The door opened, and James walked in. He looked every bit the handsome, confident man I'd fallen for, but it was the small, sleepy form in his arms that commanded the room. Sophie, wearing a yellow sundress with tiny sunflowers, her curly hair and 2 lopsided pigtails, rubbed her eyes with one fist, the other clutching her well-loved stuffed elephant. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum sucking out all sound. James's gaze found mine immediately, a warm, steady anchor in the storm of stunned faces. "Sorry we're late," he said, his voice calm and clear. Someone needed her beauty sleep. He kissed Sophie's forehead, but she woke up feeling much better and asking for Mama. His eyes never left mine. Go to Mama, sweetheart. Sophie's head popped up. Her eyes, the same warm brown as her father's, scanned the room and landed on me. A brilliant sunbeam of a smile broke across her face. Mommy, she squealed, reaching out her arms. I crossed the room and took her from James, lifting her and spinning her in a gentle circle before settling her on my hip. She immediately nestled her head into the crook of my neck, one small hand instinctively finding my necklace to fiddle with. Hi, baby girl, I murmured, kissing her temple. Are you feeling better? Uh-huh, she nodded, then looked around at the sea of pink decorations with wide-eyed wonder. Is this the princess party you told me about? It is. This is Emma's birthday party. You remember Emma, right? She's your age. Sophie nodded seriously, then stage whispered, Can I play with the princess house? I looked over at the dollhouse, where little Emma sat, her mouth agape. We should ask Emma first. It's her special day. The silence was now deafening. Karen's face was a spectacular palette of shifting emotions. Shock, confusion, dawning horror. My mother's hand was clamped over her mouth. My father looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. James, magnificently oblivious to the tension he just unleashed, walked over and extended his hand to my shell-shocked parents. You must be Emma's parents. I'm James, and this little one is Sophie. He gestured toward us, his pride palpable. I've heard so much about both of you. Emma talks about family dinners all the time. She makes that famous lasagna recipe she learned from you, Mrs. Chun. Sophie asks for it at least twice a week. My mother shook his hand on autopilot. Oh, that's nice to meet you, James. Sophie, meanwhile, had squirmed out of my arms and was now standing beside me, holding my hand while gazing longingly at the dollhouse. Little Emma, recovering her wits, shyly asked, Do you want to play? Sophie looked up at me for permission. I nodded, and she carefully approached, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to her new cousin. Within minutes, they were immersed in a world of their own, debating the domestic arrangements of a tiny doll family. James wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. How's the party been? He asked softly. Oh, you know, I said, leaning into his solid strength. The usual family dynamics. It was Karen who finally found her voice, strained and tight. Emma, she said, could I speak with you privately? I met her gaze, a newfound confidence flowing through me. Actually, Karen, I think we're good. Unless you wanted to apologize to James and Sophie for the awkward welcome, because they're going to be at a lot more family events, and I'd hate for things to start off on the wrong foot. Her mouth opened and closed, soundless. It was my cousin Brett, ever tactless, who blurted out the question on everyone's mind. So wait, Emma, you have a kid? Since when? Since always. Sophie piped up from the floor, not looking up from the dollhouse. Mom has had me since I was little. James chuckled. Sophie's sense of time is still developing. We've all been together for about 8 months now, but Emma's been part of Sophie's life for almost 2 years. Haven't you, sweetheart? The look he gave me was so full of love and certainty that I felt my eyes well up. 2 years. My mother's voice was faint. Emma, why didn't you tell us? I wanted to make sure we were serious before introducing Sophie to everyone, I explained. James and I wanted her to feel secure in our relationship before involving extended family. We were planning to announce everything soon. Announce what exactly? Karen's voice was sharp, a last, desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative that had spectacularly escaped her. James's grin widened. He looked at me, his eyes sparkling with a mix of love and mischief. Well, he said, I was hoping to do this more privately, but he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sophie looked up from her play and gasped. Daddy, is that the special ring? It is, Princess. James dropped to one knee right there on Karen's pink-strewn living room carpet, surrounded by stunned relatives and the lingering smell of birthday cake. Should I ask Mama this special question? Sophie nodded enthusiastically, scrambling to her feet and running over to join us. Emma, James began, his voice steady and sure, you've made our little family complete in ways I never knew were possible. Sophie loves you like you've been her mama from day one, and I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. Will you marry us? Both of us. Tears streamed down my face freely now. Yes, I whispered, then louder, for everyone to hear. Yes, of course. Yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, a beautiful, vintage-inspired piece that glittered brilliantly. Sophie let out a cheer and threw her arms around both of us, creating a perfect, 3-person hug that felt like the center of the universe. The room, which had been holding its breath, erupted into surprised but genuine congratulations. My mother was crying, my father was shaking James's hand with a firm, approving grip, and little Emma was clapping with delight. Karen stood frozen in the center of the celebration, a statue of stunned silence. But Emma, she finally stammered, her voice small and lost. You never said. You always seem so. So what, Karen? I asked gently, still holding my new fiancé and my daughter. So alone, she finished weakly. I was never alone, I said, my gaze sweeping over James, Sophie, and my family. I was just private. There's a difference. As James was drawn into conversation with my father, and Sophie proudly led my parents over to meet her grandma and grandpa, I moved closer to my sister. You know what the funny thing is, Karen? I said, my voice low. All those comments about me playing house. You were right. I was learning how to be a partner, how to be a parent, how to build something real and lasting. And it turns out I'm pretty good at it. Tears welled in her eyes. Am I? I'm sorry. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I replied, not with anger, but with a profound sense of clarity. But here's what I need you to understand. Even if I had stayed single forever, even if it had just been me and my cats for the rest of my life, that would have been a valid choice too. My worth isn't determined by whether I have a husband and kids. She nodded, wiping her eyes. You're right. I think I've been jealous, honestly. You always seem so confident, so sure of yourself. I got married so young, and sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to have that independence you had. The grass is always greener, I said softly. But Karen, you have a beautiful family. Your kids adore you, and you're a great mom. We just took different paths. She offered a tentative smile. Can I start over with James and Sophie? I looked over at my family. James was now on the floor with both Sophie and Emma, deeply involved in the dollhouse narrative. Sophie was explaining that the daddy doll needed the blue chair because it matched his eyes. Just like my daddy. I'd like that, I told her. But no more comments about my life choices, okay? Sophie's watching and learning, and I want her to grow up knowing that there are lots of ways to be happy. Deal, Karen said. And Emma, congratulations. Really? James seems wonderful, and Sophie is absolutely precious. She is, I agreed, my heart swelling as I watched my daughter carefully place a tiny cake on the dollhouse table. She's been the best surprise of my life. The party transformed after that. It became a whirlwind of introductions, joyful explanations, and excited future planning. Sophie, with her innate charm and lack of self-consciousness, won over every relative, calling my parents grandma and grandpa, as if she'd known them her whole life. James fit in with an easy grace, discussing everything from software engineering to parenting philosophies. When it was time to sing happy birthday, Sophie stood proudly next to her new cousin and belted out the song with more enthusiasm than anyone else. As we prepared to leave, Sophie hugged Karen. Thank you for the princess party, she said sweetly. Mama said we might have a princess party for my birthday too, and you can come if you want. Karen looked at me over Sophie's head, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I would love that, sweetheart. In the car on the way home, Sophie chattered excitedly about her new cousins and extra grandparents. James reached over and took my hand, his new ring cool against my skin. So, he said, a grin spreading across his face. That went well. I laughed, spinning my engagement ring around my finger. Better than I could have imagined. Mama, Sophie declared from the back seat. Can we play house when we get home? But like the real kind, where we're all actually a family. I met James's gaze in the rearview mirror, a world of understanding and shared joy passing between us. We already are, baby girl. I told her, my voice thick with love. We already are. Epilogue, 6 months later. The crisp April air was scented with cherry blossoms and the sweet promise of new beginnings. In my parents' backyard, surrounded by the very family that once saw my life as a half-empty canvas, I stood under a flower-covered arch and married James. Sophie, the world's most enthusiastic flower girl and ring bearer, beamed as she carried our rings in a tiny basket she had personally selected. True to her word, Mr. Whiskers and Luna made a brief, dignified appearance in the wedding photos before retreating to the more serious business of napping in a sunbeam. The adoption process, as predicted, was straightforward. By Christmas, Sophie would officially be Sophie Emma, our shared last name. She had already started a countdown calendar, declaring it the bestest Christmas present ever. The most profound change, however, was in the family dynamics. The day after the infamous birthday party, Karen and I had a long, raw conversation. She confessed to struggling with postpartum depression after her youngest was born and admitted that targeting my lifestyle was a misguided coping mechanism, a way to validate her own choices. I was incredibly proud when she started therapy. She even apologized directly to James, who, with his innate grace, accepted it without reservation. Her journey inspired my mother to seek therapy as well, to examine her own patterns and biases. Our family dinners, once a minefield of passive-aggressive remarks, were now filled with genuine conversation and mutual support. Sophie thrived in kindergarten, her confident, matter-of-fact attitude about her mixed-up family, inspiring her teacher to start a small group where children could share and celebrate their diverse family structures. James and I began tentatively discussing adding to our family in a year or two, a prospect that sent Sophie into detailed planning sessions about the care and feeding of a potential little sister. As I look back on that pivotal day at the princess party, I understand now that my victory wasn't in proving Karen wrong. It was in finally, fully, embracing the truth of my own life. My happiness with James and Sophie didn't invalidate my happiness before them. Both chapters were valid, both were mine. The cats and I were happy in our quiet apartment. We are happy now in our louder, more chaotic, love-filled house. The satisfaction came not from revenge, but from the quiet confidence of living an authentic life, on my own terms, and discovering that the family I had always wanted was the one I had built for myself all along.